They got married in secret and told me I wasn't special enough to be there. That line still echoes in my mind, sharp and cold, like the click of a door closing for good. I remember staring at my phone, looking at the message from my son, Ethan, over and over again. I thought maybe I'd misread it. Maybe it was a joke or some kind of cruel misunderstanding. But it wasn't. My only son had just married the woman he'd been dating for 3 years, Claire, and I hadn't even been invited. It wasn't like I was expecting a grand wedding or some lavish ceremony. I would have been happy with a courthouse wedding and a simple dinner after. I didn't care about decorations or flowers. I just wanted to see my son happy, to stand beside him and say, "I'm proud of you." But apparently, I wasn't special enough. That's what Claire had told him, and he had agreed. I remember sitting at my kitchen table that night, the same table where I had helped Ethan with his homework when he was 10, where we'd eaten takeout during his college breaks, where I'd cried silently after his father left. Every memory in that house had him in it, and now he'd built a new life without me. I had done everything I could for him. After his father walked out when Ethan was 15, I'd worked 2 jobs just to keep us afloat. I dipped into my savings for his tuition, sold my jewelry to help with his first apartment, and when he met Claire, sweet, charming, polite Claire, I thought maybe I'd finally get to see him settle down. She had that innocent smile, that calm voice, that way of making you feel like she respected you. But behind that softness was something else, something calculating. I just hadn't seen it yet. When they moved in together, I offered to help them get started. "It's just a few months," Ethan said. "We'll pay you back once things get stable." I didn't care about the money. He was my son. That's what mothers do. I helped with rent, bought them furniture, even covered a few of their bills when they were struggling. Every time they said, "Thank you," it felt like love. It felt like family. But slowly, the tone shifted. Calls became shorter, visits became rarer, and when Claire did speak to me, it was always about something they needed. A loan for car repairs, help with groceries, a deposit for a trip they couldn't afford but really needed for their mental health. I told myself it was temporary. That's what love does. It makes excuses. Then came the wedding announcement. Not an invitation, just a photo of them standing at an altar, smiling, surrounded by people I didn't even know. I remember zooming in on the photo like a detective, looking for some trace of me, some detail that said I mattered. But there was nothing. Not one reminder that I existed. When I finally confronted Ethan, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. I asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" There was a long pause, and then his voice came through, cold, defensive. "Mom, it wasn't personal. Claire and I wanted something intimate. Only special people were there." Special people. After everything I'd done for him, I wasn't one of them. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked around the house like a ghost, replaying every moment of his childhood in my head. His first steps, his first heartbreak, the nights I stayed up sewing his Halloween costumes or making soup when he was sick. I'd poured my whole life into him, and he'd poured me out like I was nothing. The next morning, something inside me snapped, but not in anger, in clarity. I realized I had spent years financing their happiness while ignoring my own. Every time I paid one of their bills, I was buying a seat at a table where I wasn't welcome, and now they'd shown me that clearly. So, I stopped. The first step was small. I canceled the automatic transfers I used to send them each month. I changed my bank passwords. I stopped answering calls when I saw their names. It felt terrifying at first, like cutting off oxygen, but with each day that passed, the air got cleaner. A week later, Ethan called. "Mom, the rent's due. What's going on?" "I'm done helping," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. What do you mean, done? I've always said yes, and that's the problem. There was a long silence. Then he hung up. For a few days, I thought maybe that was it, that they'd just move on and leave me alone. But then came the texts. Long paragraphs from Claire, dripping with guilt and fake concern. "We're worried about you," she wrote. "You've been acting strange. Ethan says you sound paranoid." Paranoid. The same word she had once used to describe her toxic mother. That's when I realized what was coming. They weren't just going to leave me alone, they were going to paint me as unstable, to make me the villain in their story. And all because I stopped being their ATM. But I wasn't going to let them win. I started documenting everything. Every message, every call, every withdrawal. I printed out receipts and statements, made copies, kept them in a folder marked just in case. My friend Marlene, who lived next door, noticed I was quieter than usual. When I told her what happened, she sighed. "Honey, you'd be surprised how many people go through this. Kids turning on parents over money. You're not crazy. You're just done." She introduced me to a lawyer she knew, a kind, patient man named Mr. Weber. He specialized in elder financial protection. I laughed when she said that. Elder? I'm not that old. But when I met him, he didn't talk to me like a client. He talked to me like someone who mattered. I told him everything, from the years of financial support to the sudden shift in their tone after the wedding. He listened, took notes, and finally said, "You did the right thing by cutting them off, but I'd be careful. This kind of dependency doesn't end quietly."
He was right, because just 2 weeks later, there was a knock on my door, and standing there was a woman with a badge and a clipboard. "Mrs. Thompson?" she asked. "I'm with Adult Protective Services. We received a report expressing concern about your mental state." My stomach dropped. I didn't even have to ask who filed the report. The woman stepped inside, glancing around like she expected to see chaos. "Your son mentioned possible memory issues, confusion with finances," she said gently. "Do you mind if we talk?" I laughed, a bitter, exhausted sound. Memory issues? The only thing I forgot was how to be used. I answered every question clearly, showed her my files, my accounts, even my planner. When she left, she looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry you had to go through this," she said. "I'll be closing this case immediately." That night, I sat on my couch in the dark, staring at the wall. I should have felt relieved, but all I felt was hollow. My own son had tried to have me investigated, just because I stopped paying his bills. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was war. I knew then that this wasn't going to stop until I made it stop. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have kept forgiving, kept giving, hoping they'd finally change? Or would you do what I was about to do? Take back control, no matter how much it hurt. Because that night, as I locked up the house and turned off the lights, I promised myself something. I wasn't going to be their victim anymore. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one. But this time, I'd play by their rules, and I'd make sure they'd regret ever underestimating me. They came at me with paperwork like people bring guns to a fistfight. Cold, clinical, and meant to intimidate. 2 weeks after the social worker left, I got a letter with a law firm's return address. My heart dropped when I opened it. Ethan and Claire had filed something in probate court, asking the judge to declare me mentally incompetent and to appoint a guardian for my finances. Guardianship. As if my life was some clock they could wind down and take apart. When I called Mr. Weber, his voice was steady and practical. He said, "They've crossed a line. This is aggressive. They want control, and they'll use whatever thread of evidence they can twist into proof. We have to move fast." I could hear the fatigue in his voice, but beneath it, there was a kind of quiet readiness that steadied me. I wanted to yell at him that I wasn't fragile paper to be defended. I was a woman who'd raised a child alone, who'd paid mortgages and bills and kept her house through bad years. But I also knew this wasn't the time for theatrics. This was war. Legal, slow, and precise. Ethan showed up at my door the day before the hearing, flanked by Claire and a slim man in a dark suit who introduced himself as their attorney. They looked like a family portrait gone wrong, smiles that didn't reach their eyes, and the kind of posture people practice for cameras. Ethan tried to sound casual. "Mom, we just want what's best for you. People are worried." Claire hovered, the picture of contrition. Their lawyers spoke in soft, dangerous sentences about concern and family welfare and intermittent confusion. I invited them in. I wanted them to see my hands steady on the teacup. I wanted them to see that my kitchen wasn't chaotic, that my checkbook balanced, that the candles on the mantel were not a sign of neglect. I wanted them to see the folder I'd made. Bank statements, receipts for rent and furniture and car repairs, copies of messages where Ethan had promised to pay me back, notes from doctors and friends who could vouch for my competence. I let them take one look, then I closed the folder and smiled. "That won't stop them," Claire said later. "There's always another way." She was right. There was always another way, and I was starting to learn what their other ways looked like. Mr. Weber moved like someone who had rehearsed for this many times. He filed what he called a notice of intent to contest and asked the court for an emergency hearing to block any immediate guardianship. He advised me to get a competency evaluation by a neurologist and a psychiatrist, not because I wanted to prove anything to strangers, but because I wanted to build an ironclad case that these accusations were not only false, but malicious. Getting tested felt surreal. Sitting in an examination room while a young doctor asked me to name the President of the United States, to draw a clock, to remember a list of words. There was a part of me that wanted to laugh. I think half the staff expected me to crumble, but the tests returned normal. The neuropsychologist's report was clinical and exact. No cognitive impairment, no signs of dementia. When I handed that report to Mr. Weber, he let out a sound like relief and something else, a quiet vindication. Meanwhile, Ethan and Claire kept pushing. Their lawyer tried to speak to my bank, insinuating that I might be vulnerable and that a temporary freeze would be in my best interest. I got a call from an automated system one afternoon. My bank had put a hold on a transfer. My stomach sank. But Mr. Weber called the bank and explained the situation. Within hours, the hold was lifted. They were trying every angle. Legal maneuvers, calls to neighbors, even a few people from church who they'd butterflied with convenient half-truths about my erratic behavior.
That's when I learned how small-town gossip and professional polish can be used together like a slow-acting poison. They planted stories, subtle, plausible, and devastating. She left the stove on. She's been calling at odd hours, rambling. She mixed up bills. None of it was true, but truth rarely matters when you have a narrative. I started to fortify myself. I asked Marlene to be present for any unexpected visits. I set up call forwarding so every call from numbers I didn't recognize would go to voicemail. And then I printed those voicemails and transcribed them. I began to collect the smallest pieces of evidence, photos of the checks I'd written, receipts with my handwriting, old emails where Ethan thanked me for bail money after a stupid college night, the text thread where Claire asked if I could spot them for a car repair and Ethan promised to take care of it next month. The folder grew heavy with proof. But the real turning point was when I started recording. Not in some dramatic, cinematic way, just simple, legal audio recordings of interactions when I felt pressured. Ethan had come over to talk the night the probate notice arrived. He sat across from me at the table and started in with the same lines. "We're worried, Mom. You don't remember what you used to." I feel sick admitting it, but I hit record on my phone and let him talk. His voice got sharper, angrier the longer he spoke, and at one point he raised his voice and told me he and Clear were trying to protect the family assets. Having that recording was like catching a net around them. Their words, unfiltered, sounded different when captured out of theater and placed on cold, undeniable paper. I used that recording carefully. Mr. Weber said, "Don't post it, don't make it viral. We use it where it matters." He sent a copy to the court with our opposition papers. It was one more nail in the coffin of their claims. They weren't stupid. A month into our fight, they escalated. They filed affidavits from two people who claimed they'd seen me confused. The affidavits were thin, no dates, vague anecdotes, but they were the kind of thing that could persuade a judge if left unchallenged. They also subpoenaed my neighbors, trying to find someone who would say I'd become a burden. That backfired. When Claire's witnesses came to court, they forgot how fragile their tales sounded under oath. Mrs. Ortiz from across the hall, who'd known me for 20 years, testified to the opposite. I was meticulous with my bills, sharp as ever, and always willing to lend a hand. A local pastor I'd volunteered with for years described me as engaged and capable. My folder's weight showed up in people's memories. There was no glamour in what I'd done. It was the quiet labor of being a mother and neighbor and friend, but that labor translated into testimony that mattered. Still, they tried one last cheap trick. A clerk who relied on a now deleted social media post where I joked about forgetting where I put my glasses, a self-deprecating joke I'd made years ago, tried to spin it as evidence of cognitive decline. Mr. Weber slammed down a printout of my calendar full of appointments and meetings, volunteer hours, and classes I'd enrolled in. I'd even started an art course a month earlier and had paintings stacked in my living room. My schedule's busier than yours, apparently, I told him, and he snorted. People like to pretend the elderly are invisible until they want to take what's theirs. I wasn't invisible. I was inconvenient. The fight had seeped into the fabric of my days. There were mornings when I woke up trembling, exhausted by the emotional labor. But there were other mornings when I felt ferociously alive, focused, strategic, and certain. I wasn't just defending myself. I was building a case that would show the pattern. For over 3 years, tens of thousands of dollars in support, the gradual exclusion, the sudden timeline of the secret wedding, and then the attempt to erase me by law. The narrative was ugly, but it was mine to tell. If they wanted to play courtroom chess, I would not only play, I'd force them into checkmate with facts. And in the quieter hours, when the house was still, I started to plan beyond the courtroom. What would be worse for them? Legal victory or public accountability? I asked myself that question a lot. A judge could deny their petition, and they could still scuttle my finances in petty, painful ways, but the record of their behavior, the filing, the affidavits, the recorded conversations would remain. I could not only win back my autonomy, I could make sure everyone who mattered knew what they tried to do. Not for vengeance sake, although I won't lie, the idea of watching them face the truth did give me a strange warmth, but to reclaim my dignity. So I mapped out a strategy that was twofold. First, ironclad legal defense. Competency reports, witness statements, financial records, recorded conversations. Second, reputation reinforcement. Not like gossip or revenge posts, but a careful, dignified presentation of the truth to people who'd known me for years. Letters to the pastor, calls to friends, statements to a few trusted community leaders. I wanted the facts to be visible, not weaponized. There were close calls. Once, a bank manager called and asked for additional documentation for a withdrawal I had scheduled for a trip I was planning. Their questions were probing, a way to delay me. "We're required to ensure your accounts are protected," the clerk said apologetically. Every delay felt like a lurch forward in their favor. Another time, a letter arrived threatening litigation for defamation if I spoke publicly about their concerns. The lawyer's name on the heading was the same slim man in the dark suit who'd once smiled like a family friend. But each time they pushed, I pushed back. I filed my own motion to dismiss their guardianship petition, attached affidavits, included the neuropsych report, and asked the court to sanction them for filing frivolous claims. It felt audacious, but audacity was what the situation required. I wasn't just defending. I was setting a boundary in the only language they'd used: legal consequence. What would you do? I asked a group of women at the art class one afternoon, casual, like I was asking about color choices. They listened, and one by one, they offered to testify. People I'd helped over the years, a young mom I'd tutored, a retired teacher I'd driven to appointments, volunteered statements. Their support wasn't flashy. It was practical and precise, and it mattered more than any protest sign ever could. By the time the pre-trial conference arrived, I felt like someone who had learned how to breathe underwater. I could see the fear in Ethan's eyes now, where before there had been nothing but entitlement. Claire's calm had thinned to a brittle edge. Their attorney approached Mr. Weber during a recess and made a low, polite threat about appeals and reputational damage. Mr. Weber smiled the smile of someone who wasn't buying it. "You underestimated her," he said later, closing the folder with a decisive thump. "They thought money and influence would be enough. They didn't count on the fact that you've spent half your life making small, concrete investments in people who will stand for you." I thought about all the small things that had added up to this moment. The grocery runs, the late-night homework, the patched sweaters, the loan for a down payment, the nights I worked double shifts so he could take a class. Those were not transactions. They were history. And history has witnesses. As I left the courthouse that day, the sun felt sharp and clean. I was tired and raw, but also resolute. The fight was far from over, but I was no longer surprised by what people would do for money. I knew the battlefield now, and I had chosen my weapons: evidence, witnesses, and the kind of steady stubbornness that doesn't look glorious, but sometimes wins wars. Would you have believed that a mother could be this strategic? That a woman who'd spent her life giving could suddenly become the kind of person who refused to be erased? Be honest. Would you have spent your savings if they'd treated you the way mine did? I wanted the audience with me in those moments, to feel the heat in the calculation and the slow burn of righteous resolve. Because in the end, this wasn't just about money. It was about who gets to tell your story. And I decided I was taking mine back. One receipt, one witness, one recorded moment at a time. The day of the hearing came wrapped in that kind of quiet that feels staged, like the world is holding its breath. I arrived early with Mr. Weber. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and sanitizer. The judge was a woman, maybe my age, with iron gray hair and a look that could slice through excuses. I liked her instantly. Ethan and Claire sat 2 rows ahead. He looked smaller in that suit, like a child trying on adulthood. She, in her pastel blouse and deliberate calm, looked like someone who had rehearsed empathy until it became muscle memory. When she turned to glance at me, our eyes met for a half second. Hers didn't flicker, mine didn't either. Mr. Weber laid out our evidence in steady layers: the bank statements showing 3 years of support, the neuropsych evaluations, the recorded conversation where Ethan said, "Protect the family assets." The judge listened, silent, occasionally jotting a note. When their lawyer stood up, his voice carried that syrupy confidence of men who think charm counts as logic. He talked about my increasing forgetfulness, the danger of exploitation, and how Ethan only wanted to ensure my mother's safety. Then he called Ethan to the stand. My son looked at me before swearing in. For a second, I thought I saw doubt flicker, maybe guilt, but it passed. He spoke in calm, controlled sentences about how worried he was, how I'd been different. He said I'd withdrawn from family life, acted erratically with money. The words rolled off him like he'd practiced them in front of a mirror. Mr. Weber didn't rush his cross-examination. He said, "Your mother was confused about her finances," he began. "Could you remind the court who managed those finances for the past 3 years?" "Mom did." "Who set up the automatic transfers that sent you money?" "Mom." "And who canceled them?" "Mom." "So she was competent enough to support you, but when she stopped, she became incompetent." The courtroom rustled. Even the judge's pen paused. Ethan shifted, eyes darting toward Claire. When it was Claire's turn, her poise cracked within minutes. Mr. Weber pulled out the printed messages, her requests for money, her polite promises to pay back what she never did. "Would you call these messages financial abuse or gratitude?" he asked. She stammered, searching for a way out. Her attorney objected. Overruled. Then came my turn. I stood up, took the oath, and felt every eye settle on me. My palms were damp, but my voice was steady. I talked about the years after my husband left, the double shifts, the nights of exhaustion that built a home and a son's future. I admitted my mistakes, saying yes too often, giving too much. I told them about the secret wedding, the message that called me not special enough, the slow dawning of what that meant. I'm not confused. I'm just done being used. The judge didn't move. She looked at me for a long, evaluating moment, then nodded. When court adjourned for the day, I didn't look back at them. I walked out with my lawyer and felt something loosen in my chest, like a thread finally unspooling. But I knew it wasn't over. The case wasn't decided yet. The judge set another hearing for final arguments. Ethan's side looked rattled, though. Claire avoided my eyes completely now. Their lawyer whispered furiously to them in the hallway, gesturing toward the doors. I caught snippets. Settle. Reputation. Too risky. That night, my phone lit up with a message from Ethan. "Mom, can we talk privately?" I didn't answer. 2 hours later, another. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Still, I didn't reply. The silence between us said more than words could. The next morning, Claire tried her hand. "We can fix this if you just drop everything. It's bad for all of us." That one made me laugh out loud. Bad for all of us was code for we're losing. Mr. Weber thought they might offer a settlement, some fake apology maybe, a public statement that it was all a misunderstanding. But I didn't want that. I wanted the record to stand. I wanted it on paper that they'd tried to strip me of my freedom for money. In the days before the next hearing, I found myself thinking back to Ethan as a little boy. The way he'd curl up on the couch after a nightmare. I used to tell him, monsters don't always hide under the bed. Sometimes they wear faces we love. I never thought those words would circle back to us like this. The final hearing was shorter. Their lawyer tried one last appeal to emotion, painting Ethan as a worried son and me as a prideful mother who refused help. Then Mr. Weber played the recording. The sound filled the room. Ethan's voice, calm but cold, saying, "We're trying to protect the family assets." The tone wasn't love. It was ownership. When the recording ended, no one spoke. The judge looked at him and asked quietly, "Is that your voice, Mr. Thompson?" He nodded. Her ruling came the following week. I sat alone at my kitchen table, phone on speaker, listening as Mr. Weber read it aloud. Petition denied. The court finds no evidence of incompetence or need for guardianship. Costs to petitioners. Simple, surgical, final. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just sat there, shaking. Years of exhaustion and anger and heartbreak boiled up, and I cried. Not out of victory, but release. Later that evening, I stepped outside and watched the streetlights blink on. My house was quiet, my bank account secure, my mind clear. I'd won. Legally, morally, factually. But the victory came with a loneliness that stung. The child I'd raised was still out there, and now there was no bridge left between us. Still, I had no regrets. For the first time in years, I felt my life belonged to me again. Would you have forgiven them after that? Could you, knowing they dragged your name through court for a slice of your savings? Be honest. Would you have picked up the phone if they called to say sorry? I didn't. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, opened my art supplies, and started painting the sunrise. Because after so many years of paying for other people's happiness, it felt good to create something just for me. And as the colors bled together on the canvas, I made myself one quiet promise. This wasn't the end. It was the start of something I should have begun years ago, a life where my worth wasn't measured in what I gave, but in what I finally kept. The court ruling ended the war on paper, but not in my heart. For weeks after, the silence in my house was so heavy it felt like alive, like something watching, waiting. No more messages, no phone calls, no trace of Ethan or Claire. I thought maybe they'd just vanish into their own guilt and I could finally breathe. But guilt doesn't disappear. It festers. I saw it in small, cruel ways. Whispers from old friends, sideways glances at the grocery store. Someone had been talking. "She's losing it," one woman murmured near the produce aisle. Another chimed in, "Poor thing, I heard she's not right in the head." Claire's fingerprints were all over those stories. I knew it. The court couldn't give me my money, so she decided to steal my reputation instead. And in a small town, reputation is everything. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself that truth wins eventually. But then a letter came, a notice from the local art gallery. My upcoming exhibition, the one I'd worked on for months, had been postponed indefinitely due to unforeseen circumstances. No explanation, no apology, just gone. I found out later from an old friend on the inside that Claire had casually mentioned my mental instability to the gallery director during a charity brunch. They didn't want drama, so they quietly backed away. That was the day I stopped crying and started planning. You see, revenge doesn't always mean fire and fury. Sometimes it's precision, patience, the quiet kind of justice that builds in the dark until it's undeniable. I began documenting everything, every rumor, every lie, every small humiliation. I talked to Mr. Weber again, and he suggested something simple. Let them speak, then expose the truth. So I did. I started recording a video diary, not for social media, not for anyone else, just for myself. I sat in front of my old camera and spoke like I was testifying again, about what happened, about how it felt to be betrayed by your own child, about how people love to romanticize forgiveness until they're the ones being devoured by it. Those recordings became my therapy. And then, one night, I uploaded one, just one, to a private group for older artists. The response shocked me. Messages poured in. Dozens of people, mothers, fathers, siblings who'd gone through the same thing. Their stories mirrored mine. The entitled children, the emotional manipulation, and the loneliness that follows standing your ground. The video spread quietly. It reached people who needed to hear it. And one of them, apparently, was a journalist. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the Chronicle. They were running a feature on elder exploitation, how adult children use guardianship laws to steal from their parents. They wanted my story. For a moment, I hesitated. It would mean going public, putting everything, my humiliation, my heartbreak, into print. But then I remembered what Claire said in her message. It's bad for all of us. Good. Let it be bad for them, too. When the article came out, it exploded. My face wasn't on the cover, but my words were. The headline read, "They tried to declare me incompetent, all because I said no." People talked again, but this time differently. My inbox filled with messages of support. Old friends who'd avoided me started calling. Even the gallery reached out, apologizing for the misunderstanding. They wanted to reschedule the show. And then, one night, Ethan showed up. It was raining, that soft, cold kind that blurs the streetlights. I opened the door and saw him standing there, soaked, eyes red. He looked nothing like the man who'd sat in court trying to take my freedom. He looked like the boy I used to know, scared, ashamed, human again. "Mom," he said quietly, "can we talk?" I didn't move. About what? About everything. About how we got here. For a moment, I wanted to slam the door, but something in me, not forgiveness, not softness, just clarity, told me to listen. So I stepped aside. He stood in my living room, dripping on the rug, looking nothing like the man he'd been in the courtroom. And finally, he said, "Claire left after the article. She couldn't handle the fallout. She said I ruined everything." "She's not wrong," I said. He winced. "I know. I was stupid, Mom. I thought I was protecting our future. She made it sound like it was logical, responsible." "And you believed her?" He nodding. "I don't deserve you to even hear me out." He was right. But I did anyway, because as much as anger sustained me, peace had started to taste better. "I don't hate you, Ethan, but you need to understand you broke something that doesn't fix with apologies. You took my trust and turned it into evidence." He cried then, quietly, the way grown men do when they've run out of pride. He whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." I didn't say, "I forgive you." I didn't say anything. I just watched him cry and realized that sometimes silence hurts more than words ever could. He left that night without asking to come in again, and I didn't call after him. The next morning, I woke up early, opened my window, and felt a calm I hadn't known in years. Not joy, not sadness, just balance. The world outside hadn't changed, but I had. I wasn't the woman begging for respect or love anymore. I was the woman who had faced down her own blood and still stood tall. Revenge, I realized, isn't about destroying the other person. It's about rebuilding yourself so completely that their power over you dissolves. And that's what I plan to do next.
The morning after Ethan's visit, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold long before I took a sip. My hands were steady. That surprised me. For years, they used to tremble at every unexpected sound, every message, every knock at the door. Fear had made a home inside me, built walls in my mind and furnished them with self-doubt. But that morning, for the first time, I felt none of it. Just silence. A good, clean silence that didn't demand anything from me. I stared at the blank canvas on the easel in front of me. For months, I'd avoided painting. The passion that once defined me had become tangled with the pain of everything I'd lost. But I remembered what my therapist once said after the court case. You can't erase trauma, but you can repaint over it. So, I picked up a brush. It started with slow strokes, unsure, clumsy. But as color filled the emptiness, I realized how much of myself had been waiting to return. I painted through the day, through lunch, through sunset. It was a storm of color. Reds, grays, golds. A woman standing in the rain, her reflection calm, while the world burned behind her. When I stepped back, I realized what it was. Me. That painting became the centerpiece of my gallery's reopening 3 months later. They titled the exhibit Unbroken. A woman reclaims her voice. And it sold out. Not just the paintings, the story behind them. People came not to see art, but to feel it. To see what strength looks like when it refuses to die quietly. I met so many women who whispered their stories to me between exhibits. Stories of being used, dismissed, betrayed by people who called them family. And I listened. Every word of it. Because I knew what it meant to be silenced by people you loved most.
So, I started a support circle. Just a few of us in the beginning, sitting in a cozy library room once a week, sharing stories over tea and the sound of rain outside. I didn't want to turn it into some movement or foundation. I just wanted connection, healing. But word spread faster than I expected. Within a year, we had chapters in 3 neighboring towns. A journalist who had written my original article came to one of our sessions to do a follow-up piece. She called it The Mother Who Fought Back. It went viral online. Suddenly, people who once whispered about my mental instability were quoting me in inspirational posts. Funny, isn't it? The same people who once doubted you become your biggest fans when your pain becomes fashionable. But I didn't do it for them. I did it for me. One evening, as I was closing the studio, I saw Ethan's name pop up on my phone again. This time, I didn't feel that sting of panic, just curiosity. I answered. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice quieter, softer. "I heard about your show. Congratulations." "Thank you," I said simply. I saw some of the paintings online. You look strong, happier." "I am." He paused. "I've been in therapy. I'm trying to understand why I let things go so far." "That's good," I said. "You should." He hesitated. "I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know I'm proud of you." For a moment, I closed my eyes. There was something in his voice that reminded me of the boy he once was, the one who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and tell me they were sunflowers for poor people. "I'm proud of you too, Ethan," I said softly. "For trying." And that was enough. He didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't offer it. Because forgiveness isn't a single word.
It's a slow decision you make every day not to let the past own you. That night, I sat by the window, listening to the city hum below. The lights flickered across the skyline, the air smelled faintly of rain, and I realized something profound. Revenge had brought me peace, not through destruction but through creation, through reclaiming what was stolen, my dignity, my voice, my story. So if you're listening to this and you've been used, dismissed, or told that standing up for yourself makes you cruel, listen closely. You are not cruel for refusing to be consumed. You are not heartless for cutting off those who bleed you dry. You are surviving, and sometimes survival looks a lot like revenge. Would I do it all again? Honestly, yes. Every painful, sleepless night, every tear, every courtroom glare, because it led me here, to freedom, to art, to myself. You want to know the best part? That same gallery that once canceled my exhibition now features my work in their permanent collection. The same whispers that called me unstable now call me inspirational. Life has a funny way of circling back, and this time, I'm the one standing in the center of it.
And sometimes, late at night when the city's asleep and the world feels too quiet, I look at that first painting, The Woman in the Rain, and smile. Because I know that's the moment I stopped being afraid of losing people who were never afraid of losing me. What would you have done in my shoes? Be honest. Would you have fought back? Or walked away quietly? Because me, I chose both. I walked away, but not quietly.